All right, what is up, folks? Welcome back to another episode of the Help Me Understand podcast. I'm your host, JK, and we are kicking off episode number 189 of Help Me Understand. Before getting into today's episode to talk about a reflection that I recently had that I want to pass on to you when it comes to developing yourself and or others into really solid coaches and really just better leaders, maybe even better parents. Because as a parent, I believe that you are a leader in your household. I first want to take a moment to express gratitude and say thank you for choosing to press play on the Help Me Understand podcast. You certainly have no shortage at all these days of different content that you can consume at the tip of your tongue, at the tip of your thumb. Hey, there we go. At any time. So I truly, truly never take it for granted that you chose to press play on the Help Me Understand podcast. So let's get into today's episode. I was just joking with my dad the other day that there's this phrase within the church where someone will come up, typically like the pastor or whoever the speaker is for that particular day. Or maybe they're not even the speaker. They're just someone who has been given a few minutes to share something, whether it's a testimony or the message, the sermon. And whenever they start off with, "I won't be before you long," my dad and I were joking, like never in the history of anyone who gets up who says, "I won't be before you long," have they ever not been before you for possibly way too long. So listen, if you know, you know. So I was about to start off this with, "I won't be before you long." This will be a short episode, and we'll see how the river flows here. So I'll give you a bit of context, as I typically like to do, and where today's episode is most recently being inspired from. So I recently had a conversation with one of my private training clients, one of my one-on-one clients. So I do online training and programming and coaching. So what that entails is building a personalized workout program for that particular individual, and then also not only guiding them through that workout, through them checking in with the logging their workouts and then sending in form checks, things like that. I do not do the workout with them via Zoom. I try to clarify that sometimes. However, what they'll do is they'll log the results of their workout, leave notes, different things like that. And then we also get an understanding of how things are going on from a habit standpoint, a habits-based approach to how they sleep, how their nutrition is, and then overall where their biofeedback is. So how are they feeling just generally with energy and different things like that. So one of my one-on-one clients that I provide this particular service for and I were having a recent check-in call, recent conversation. And this is a client, for context. I do not have this in front of me because it's been a while. I can safely say we have worked together for at least a year to a year and a half at minimum. We've worked together. And we've developed a pretty good relationship when it comes to coach and client at this particular point. And we were having a conversation, and they brought up something that had impacted their motivation to work out. And when we were talking through what they were expressing, they mentioned that it was something that happened back in so they began to feel this lack of motivation or reduction in consistent motivation or inspiration, however you want to quantify it or talk about it. They started to feel it back in somewhere in October/November. So if we're looking now at January, what we're talking about, and actually on the record and release of this, it's January 29th. So let's basically just call this February. So if we're talking the month of, let's say, November, December, January. So that's about 3 months. Okay. So what they shared with me is that they had just really been feeling, just not as in their rhythm, not as in their bag as they normally are. This is someone who is generally consistent when it comes to getting in their training for, on average, about 2 to 3 lifting sessions per week, and on average 1 to 2 intentional cardio sessions per week. So someone who I definitely put under the consistent category. And the overwhelming majority of my clients have worked themselves to the point of being very consistent, working through different ebbs and flows and things like that. So when they were sharing this with me, I asked them to help me understand a bit more about where they felt like the source of this was, because I think it's important to, as a coach, get an understanding of where your client believes the source of this particular problem is versus immediately jumping in to say, oh, well, I know exactly what it is. You may, as a coach, based on your experience, and you've seen this movie before, you've definitely been down this path, you may immediately already know within a couple of minutes of them describing something, know exactly what the starting point is. And also, I'm of the belief that it's not typically the most helpful for you to immediately, for me, let me put this on myself, for me to immediately jump in and say, oh, well, it's clear as day that this is actually the thing. I prefer to get my clients' feedback and their perspective because it helps me get an understanding of the filter that they're using. And if we've been making progress in helping them navigate through when they have particular timeframes where they're really struggling with something, have I been working with them enough for them to understand how to navigate through that process on their own? Also, I don't think as a coach, it's all about trying to gatekeep how you arrive to the conclusions that you do. I'm much more about, hey, so you mentioned this and you mentioned that, and what that says to me based on the information that I have. And I'm going to show you the information that I have, and I'm going to pair it all together. I'm going to show, basically, like, show your work. Then here's what I think is going on. So what they did is they were able to share with me very accurately the source of where that decline in motivation and inspiration and just kind of like began. That's a technical term, or meh. Is that how the folks say it? MEH, meh, or mid. My son would say mid. All right, so let's get back to the point. So what was great is that this person was able to identify, hey, here's what happened. So because we've been able to develop a really good coach-client relationship, and that has taken patience and some some definite ups and downs and some tough feedback, two-way tough feedback. We've developed a relationship where with this particular call, it was a check-in call. So sure, I want to get an understanding of how things been going with how you've been sleeping. Talk to me a bit about your nutrition, and let's dig, like, the part I dig the deepest into is typically the training. I'm able to check those boxes and also really like pick one thing that we're going to deep dive into. And so this was the thing that we deep dove into, if I'm using the right vernacular there. If my mom is listening, she will let me know whether or not I use the right tense of dive, dove, whatever. So as we wrapped up that particular conversation, both of us expressed that we felt good about how that conversation went. We were able to think of some options that this particular client could take going forward in order to address that problem. If not in the previous episode, I know actually my previous episode was with Kendra. So the episode before that, one of the quotes that I've picked up on from Eric Thomas is, the commitment to the solution is the answer to the problem. So we really worked on thinking about solutions to the actual problem that had presented itself. So instead of trying to address, well, what are different things that this particular client can do to get motivated? What are things that they can do to just re-engage their discipline and their structure? We actually focused on a particular event that really seemed to be the catalyst for the reduction in the motivation. And I'm pretty big, I would like to think that I'm pretty big on making sure that as much as I believe it can be helpful to describe different things that I do with clients, I'm also really big on respecting their privacy. So I try not to give like super duper specifics here. So yeah, we worked through what they had going on by figuring out some options. Now, there's still some homework to do, as I say. They will still need to work on implementing those particular options that were given. And what felt really good is that we both played a role, and it was a collaboration versus okay, listen, here's clearly what's going on. Go do this, and this will fix the problem, and we're good to go. It's kind of deeper than that. So upon going back to review my notes from that particular conversation, one of the things that I really reflected on, and what I wanted to bring to you with this episode, was reflecting on, then asking myself in basically the post-call review. Because with many, many of my calls, at some point within a few days of having a call with someone, whether it's a potential new client, an existing client, or somewhat of a more like personal interaction that I've had with someone who just has some questions and they'd like to kind of shoot the breeze, as the old folks say, I will typically take some time to go back and do a post-call review and just get an understanding of, okay, in this particular situation, like what am I taking away from this for myself, not just for that particular individual. And one of the takeaways that I had was sitting down to evaluate, as a coach, what can I do better to set an environment where that particular individual and any other client that I have feels like they are able to share earlier in the process when they're starting to feel that they're out of sync, out of rhythm, just not really digging it. Like the vibes are just off, and they've noticed that. Because remember, in this particular situation that I'm talking about, the person let me know, yeah, this started kind of late October, early November, excuse me, is when this started. And they brought it up on a call that we had here in mid to late January. And we've certainly had calls in between that. And then also for all of my clients, they have access to me through Telegram Messenger. And we've definitely messaged back and forth about various things within that particular time frame. So my reflection as a coach is to use this concept that I first heard about when I read the book Good to Great. That I'm certainly not going to say that's the first time that this whole idea of looking in the mirror before looking out the window was ever introduced to me. I can think back to conversations that it's gonna makes me laugh. I can think back to conversations that my parents had with me on the regular whenever I would get in trouble, because I got in trouble fairly often as a young kid. I got in other trouble when I was older. However, most of that I was able to navigate without having their quote unquote assistance, we'll call it. Basically, I was able to get away with it and fix the problem before they figured out what happened. Love you, mom and dad. But very often in those conversations, I did what is many, many kids, teenagers will do, and try to deflect. Hey, well, what about so and so? And he said that to me, and I'm not going to let him disrespect me. And this person made this comment, or you're getting on me about what I did, but what about what they did? And I don't know that my parents ever hit me with the whole like, well, if all your friends jumped off a bridge, would you jump off a bridge too? Because knowing my attitude at that time, and I still have a little bit of this in me, knowing my attitude at that time, I would have started asking a few questions about the bridge. I'd be like, well, I don't know. Like, is it like when you saying jump off a bridge, like how high is the bridge? I don't know. Like I definitely was a smart, whatever. So from a long time ago, I was instilled with an understanding that at the end of the day, it's about also evaluating your behavior and what you're responsible for, and your role in owning the scenario that has occurred, really understanding your ability to craft the environment. And I talk about this book, Good to Great. The author was Jim Collins, I believe. So in Good to Great with Jim Collins, what he talks about is basically going from a good leader to a great leader. And I think this may have been in a part called Level 5 Leadership. And one of the things that he talked about, and I read this book long ago when I was in my 20s, I believe. And one of the concepts he talked about that has always stuck with me is always look in the mirror before looking out the window. So I took that to mean when there is a particular situation that you're faced with, whether it be dealing with an individual or dealing with an event that just happened, and you're evaluating how to move forward, or you're going back and you're reflecting on, okay, uh, how do we try to prevent this from happening again? Because in that particular time frame, when I would have read this book in my 20s and my early 30s, a big portion of my responsibility within like the retail world, because I've been in the retail management field I got my first position when I was like 19. So it's been a minute. As they say, it's been close to like 2 decades in management specifically. Um, I often was the person who was asked to come in and basically be like the turnaround artist, the turnaround guy, like take a situation where things were just awful. Like people were underperforming, business was underperforming, the store was not doing well, loss prevention, like people, like theft was happening like crazy. That was like kind of those two things were kind of my bread and butter, like situations where there was a ton of loss, what we call just loss in the business, whether that was internal or I'm sorry, excuse me, whether it was external, where you've got shoplifters and things like that. And the markets I'm working in is like St. Louis and Chicago. Worked in the Lansing, Michigan market for a little bit, also Flint, Michigan. So I've been in like some spots, right? So whether it's external or it's internal, you've got employees that are either making errors causing you to lose money, or they're just straight up thieving. Like you got people that are straight up stealing. I remember one time having a conversation with a dude that I was like, something's just off about this. It was one of my stock guys when I worked at a store in Flint, Michigan. And so I just kind of tried to be more aware, and I just noticed some particular patterns. And then one day I just noticed he was walking funny. So I asked him to pat his legs because I knew what was happening. And he had taped a whole bunch of product like around his legs underneath, at the time, like Jinko jeans were really big, or Jinko pants, like the big raver pants. I did own a pair of those back in the day, by the way. And yeah, he had like stole a bunch of stuff. So anyways, my MO was to really come in and try and turn around stores that were in pretty much like either dire straits or just severely underperforming based on what the company expected or the regional vice president expected, that sort of a thing. And um, reading books like Good to Great, Now Discover Your Strengths, the Q12, like things like that. I've been into that stuff since way early in the day, the Patrick Lencioni stuff, Zig Ziglar, all that stuff. So a big part of those was understanding how much you as a leader own what's happening inside of your environment. And it's so easy to put the onus on somebody else instead of also including first, like start with yourself. So that's the looking in the mirror before looking out the window. And I was thinking about this with my client. And when I was doing that post-call review, really reflecting on, okay, what are pieces in my particular system as a coach that fostered an environment where I didn't pick up on this particular thing happening. And so with this particular client, based on what they shared, I was able to pick up just a small tweak that I could make in my communication with her and also with other clients, to be a bit more specific about a couple of questions that I'm asking as far as workout execution, because that's really what this had to do with as far as like workout execution, a couple of easy tweaks that I could make. Now, the point of my message is not specifically, do this to increase your motivation. It's actually because that's looking out the window sort of stuff. My point for this is really specifically to coaches, leaders, parents. So coaches, parents, leaders, I put them up all underneath the leadership bucket, coaches and leaders. Excuse me. Let me rewind. So under the leadership umbrella, coaches and parents, specifically like nutrition coaches, fitness coaches, health coaches, whatever you want to call yourself. I'd even say coaches of teams, athletics, different things like that. Whether you're, a coach or a leader, a manager inside of your business, take time to reflect and review on what part of whatever feedback you just received from someone, what part of that you own when it comes to setting the environment to reduce or close the gap in when that thing happens to when it's reported to you. Because when something is a big enough problem that it is now like blown up, it typically didn't start that way. It is rare that something just completely explodes out of nowhere as far as work situations, situations with kids, situations with clients. So it's very rare that a particular quote unquote outburst didn't start with some sort of a match that got lit a while back. And many times what it is it's a small spark. It's that little crack in the sidewalk that eventually over time, when not addressed, becomes like a big gaping hole. I think about potholes from driving in the city of Chicago. Respectfully, city of Chicago, good Lord, when it comes to potholes. And I think about that often, where you can have the smallest of cracks that when not properly addressed, and there's other cities too, so I'm not trying to, like, Chicago's not catching all the strays here, but slowly but surely, when those things are not addressed over years, that crack becomes a cavern. I think that might be the right term. And it just becomes a big issue. And as a leader, again, whether you're a coach, a manager, a parent, whatever it is, sometimes it takes, after you've solved the particular problem, you've had, let's take it to a manager at work, you've had the conversation about addressing the issue that they brought to you. That issue that they brought to you, if we're talking something, let's use like HR related, like somebody's really upset about something else that someone said to them. And I can't even count the number of conversations, whether it was something where I'm working with one team member who's upset with another team member, or straight up, I'm working with a team member who's upset about something I did. Like, Lord knows. Okay. Rarely is it that, okay, all of a sudden the comment that employee A made to employee B, or manager A made it to manager B, or whatever combination you want to use, rarely is it that none of that was kind of festering and starting to happen earlier in the process. More likely than not, you saw those behaviors going on and you decided not to address it. You decided to tolerate it. Or perhaps it's those things were going on. Each of those parties wanted to bring it to your attention, but what can you go back and think to yourself, man, what could I have done differently to at least make sure that these people were aware they had the opportunity to let me know this earlier? Like, when I say I have an open door policy, first of all, is my door actually open? I remember that being one of the craziest things, working for somebody who, like, walked me through, this is way back in the day, when I was in my late teens, working for a manager who had an open door policy, but they always locked the door whenever they went into the office. And I was like, yo, do you see anything that's a little bit off here with, you say you have an open door policy, but every time you go into the office, you close the door. And I'm aware that you're not doing anything that's super confidential, but it's just, it's not really giving, to use the term that the folks say, it's not giving open door, because your door is never open. In fact, it's always closed. And their response to me was, well, people can knock. And I'm like, oh, okay. And at the time, if I were to be able to have a conversation with that person now, I would ask them to, help me understand what you believe open door policy really means. And that, from my perspective now, what that means is inviting people in versus just like, yeah, if you want something, it's your responsibility to like do a whole bunch of stuff to like jump through hoops and let me know. So I'm getting a bit off topic, as I will usually do in these episodes. So to bring it back, what I want to leave you with is, for anyone in a position of leadership in and or outside of your home, in interactions where I will completely acknowledge that you first need to handle the situation that's in front of you. Handle that situation that's in front of you. Do what you can to also dig to the source of that particular problem. So the commitment to the solution is the answer to the problem. Love that. And then when you do your post interaction reflection as a parent, as a coach, as a manager, or anywhere in between, take some time to hold up the mirror and go even deeper to where you solve the problem. Go even deeper and ask yourself, is there anything that I can do differently going forward to shorten the time frame between where that spark, where that match was lit, where that crack started to be visible in the foundation, to shorten the time frame between that and when it was actually reported after, let's say if it's the crack in the street and all of a sudden it just keeps getting wider and wider, how many cars will it take busting up before that pothole is finally enough of an issue? So with that, I'm going to close out today's episode. As always, if I will ask you, if you could do me a favor, leave a rating and or review on whatever platform you may be listening and or watching on. We are now on YouTube with the Help Me Understand podcast. So I appreciate any support that I can get. So thank you again for listening. This has been episode number 189. Take care, and I'll talk to you next time.